and welcome back to my channel. My name is Kate, and today I decided I would do my first ever tag video. And since I started my channel in July, I figured this would be the perfect way to cover what I've read in the first half of this 2021. So, as you may have guessed, I will be doing the mid-year book Freakout tag. I'm not really going to freak out about anything, but hopefully it'll be interesting, and I might have some hot takes, so please don't hate me. And without further ado, I'll go ahead and start on the first prompt, which is the best book you've read so far in 2021. And for that one, I have, so for this first prompt, it was really difficult for me to decide. I've had some amazing reads in the first half of this year, and there were a few that I wanted to pick for everything, and I didn't want to just have the same answer for a bunch of these prompts, so I ended up picking one that was a little bit of an unusual pick for me, since I don't read a ton of horror, and that is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. And I'd previously really only read Stephen King as far as horror goes, but I picked this up because one of the channels that I support on Patreon, Jade's Bedtime Bookworms channel, picked this for the monthly read in June. June. Time is an illusion. And I loved it. It's one of the... So the synopsis for this one is that it follows 4 American Indian men who grew up on the Blackfeet Reservation, and it's all about how, as kids, they had made a mistake that eventually comes back to haunt them about 10 years later, and it's kind of all about the horror of these men having to face that. The writing, technically, is some of the best I've ever read. I was just amazed at how a lot of times with horror novels and books, some of the characters take a backseat to the terror of it. In this, I felt for all of the characters involved. I felt for the men and kind of the boys that they had been, and I felt for the people who ended up as basically collateral damage, and I felt for the antagonist. I was really impressed by how Jones handled all of those perspectives and made it a really creepy psychological horror. It's gonna be probably on my favorite books, period, for the foreseeable future, and it made me want to read basically everything he's written. So definitely ended up on my best of 2021. The next prompt is best sequel you've read so far in 2021, and this one is also in the running for best book of 2021, but I ended up picking it for the sequel category, A, because it is a sequel, and B, because then it wouldn't overwhelm everything, and that is Return of the King by Tolkien. J.R.R. if you want to be specific. I was not always a Lord of the Rings fan. I enjoyed the movies when they came out, but didn't get like super fan levels. I just thought they were fun. I tried to read Fellowship twice when I was younger, once in my teens and once in my 20s, but it wasn't until this year, when I listened to it on audiobook, that I fully fell in love with it. I actually finally finished Fellowship and enjoyed it, and I enjoyed Two Towers, but the way that Return of the King finishes some of these character arcs and kind of solidifies some of the lore, and this epic fight between good and evil just cemented it as one of the best books I've ever read. I'm not sure that anything, when placed side to side with it, that anything could top this book for me. It's always gonna be like in my heart forever. So if you haven't read Lord of the Rings, I hope you do pick it up at some point. Not everyone is necessarily gonna love it, but I can't recommend it highly enough. Number 3, new release you haven't read yet but want to, and that was hard to pick one, but I ended up going with The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. This one is, the most I know about it is that it's an Indian-inspired fantasy with 2 female lead characters, one of whom is a princess who's basically been imprisoned by her brother, and the other is her maidservant, who has kind of her own secrets, and it's all about how they kind of deal with the situations they're in, and kind of, my understanding is that they eventually work together to kind of overthrow things. So that's the most I know about it. I've never read any Indian-inspired fantasy, and it sounds amazing, so I'm definitely really looking forward to this one, and I've heard very good things from many of the people who've read it. The next prompt on the list is most anticipated release for the second half of the year. Again, difficult one to pick, but the one I ended up picking was, and I don't have this one physically yet for obvious reasons, The Iron Widow by, hopefully I'm pronouncing this correctly, Xiran Zhao, and that one has been described as Handmaid's Tale meets Pacific Rim. It's got kind of this misogynistic society based on, I think, historical China that basically sacrifices young girls to power some of the mechs that they use in battle, and it's all about the sister of a girl who ends up being sacrificed, kind of her revenge story and how she comes back to deal with this society. It sounds amazing. I'm really looking forward to it. I love big mechs stories. I'm a sucker for that type of thing, so I'm very curious to check that one out. The next prompt on the list is biggest disappointment, and I'm laughing mostly because I think the 2 books that I have tied for this are well loved, and they are not bad books, but they were very disappointing for me personally. So the first one on the list, unfortunately, is Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I know these are going to be some hot takes, so I'm sorry to those of you who love this. I didn't hate it. I think I ended up giving it 3 stars. Project Hail Mary just wasn't what I wanted it to be. I loved The Martian by the same author because it was hard sci-fi that didn't feel like hard sci-fi to me. I often struggle with the technical details in hard sci-fi. I just don't really have a lot of interest in or understanding of the math and science elements that tend to be more common and more detailed in hard sci-fi. The Martian never felt like that. It felt like I could understand what was happening, and it was described in a way that benefited people who weren't already fans of most hard sci-fi. So I was really kind of expecting that out of Project Hail Mary, and I mean, maybe I shouldn't have been, but this was hard sci-fi for fans of hard sci-fi. The detail and clear love of math and physics and interstellar travel is a big part of the story, and it was just too much for me. The audiobook helped a lot by making me feel like I could kind of just zone out for the parts that weren't in my wheelhouse and that I didn't really care about. And then there's also a character in here that completely saved this for me and kept me from DNFing it. I can't mention who this character is without spoilers, but if you've read it, I'm pretty sure you know who I'm talking about. He was precious, and I love him. So that's all I'll say about that one. The other one that's a disappointment for me, and I know other people love this, is Master of Djinn by P. Djeli Clark. I hate putting this in the disappointment category. I love the Dead Djinn universe. I've read the other stories in it. I love Fatma, she was introduced in a short story that kind of kicked off this series, and she's just fantastic, clever detective, snazzy, 1920s Cairo with gin and magic. It all sounds amazing. I have really high expectations for this because of how much I enjoyed the previous stories, and I liked having Fatma, but I was really disappointed by some of the mystery elements of this. I just, I felt like Fatma didn't feel like a clever detective. She felt like she was constantly 3 steps behind everybody else. The pacing just seemed weird, like weirdly slow at the beginning and then really fast at the end. So it didn't meet what I was hoping to have from it. So this unfortunately ended up being a major disappointment for me. Even though it's not a bad book, it just didn't meet my expectations. The next one is biggest surprise of the year so far, and that for me was Guns of the Dawn by Adrian Tchaikovsky. This one probably shouldn't have been as big of a surprise because it was sold by Alan from Library of Alexandria as Jane Austen social commentary meets Richard Sharp historical military fiction, and that's right up my alley. I love flintlock fantasy, so I kind of did have the feeling that I was going to really enjoy this, but I had previously read a short story, or I think a novella actually, from Tchaikovsky before that I really didn't like. I ended up DNFing it 20 pages in, and it was only a little over 100 pages long. Um, but it just felt kind of heavy-handed. I liked the premise, but I didn't like the execution at all. And I was shocked at how well Tchaikovsky does these kind of putting this gentlewoman into this situation where she has to go to war, and not just go to war, but fight essentially. I mean, the feel is very much in the trenches, World War One, except in the swamps. It's really well done. It's so much more subtle and compelling than I had expected it to be. So this is going to be on my list of favorite books of the year, and it was definitely, I was surprised at how much I enjoyed this one. Next prompt on the list is favorite new author, debut or new to you. And for that, I have The Ninth Reign by Jen Williams. I hadn't heard of this book at all until Elliot Brooks mentioned it, and then kept mentioning it, and thank you for that because I loved this. It's hard to describe. It brings in fantasy elements from all over the place, but kind of combines them in this really original world building, and very character focused. Like all of the characters felt vibrant and alive to me, and I loved them, and I wanted to see where they were going to go, even when I was scared for them. So I go watch Elliot's video on it. It's much better than I could describe it, but I definitely really enjoyed The Ninth Reign, and it made me go out and buy not only this series, but her previous series as well. The next prompt on the list is a newest fictional crush. This one's a tough one. I don't often have crushes on the people in the books that I read. The only one I could really think of was from the Scorpio Races by Maggie Stiefvater. I originally read this in my 20s. I read this again this year, and it has 2 main characters, Sean and Puck, and kind of deals with this dangerous horse race on the island they're on, except they're racing carnivorous water horses instead of normal horses. It's very mythical in kind of a Celtic sense, and kind of creepy, but it gave me kind of the dark legend feels that I enjoy. But particularly one of the main characters, Sean, is this kind of quiet, intense person that doesn't really hold back on what he thinks, but he's also not a complete jerk about it. And the way he interacts with Puck and kind of the way they learn to trust each other and support each other is a quality I look for in a partner. So I really appreciated seeing that in a young adult story. So that's the one I would pick for a fictional crush. The next category is newest favorite character, and this one's a tie, both of them from Ninth Reign. One of the characters in that Noon is a kind of a witch character who ends up being imprisoned for a large portion of her life because of things that she's done and people being afraid of that. And I really liked that while she had regrets about stuff that had happened in her life, she was not apologetic about who she was, even as she was kind of trying to figure that out. And I appreciated kind of her character arc from the beginning, being this scared kid to where she ends up at the end of the story. And I can't wait to see where she goes in the rest of it. And then there's another character, female character in Ninth Reign, Vintage, who's kind of like a lady scholar, and she's so sassy, but also really welcoming and loving that I adored her instantly, and I really hope that nothing happens to her because it would break my heart. But um, we'll see. We'll see what happens in the rest of the Winnowing Flame series. So the next prompt is book that made you cry, and this is where I had to limit myself on Return of the King because I knew I had to pick it for this category. I am somewhat of a crybaby when it comes to sad moments in books, but the only one that I've felt all of the emotions, including deep tragedy, is Return of the King. And there's a particular scene towards the end. No, actually, it's not. It's midway in Return of the King that when I read the original scene, I cried because it's ending this particular character arc. And then when, like a week or two later, I was telling my boyfriend about it, and I ended up making him listen to me read this paragraph because it's so beautifully written, and I started crying again. So I knew I had to pick Return of the King for this one. It's just so emotionally impacting. Like I said, it's forever going to be one of my favorite books. The next category is book that made you happy. And for this one, I have actually a nonfiction. I think it would be considered a memoir. It's Jenny Lawson's newest book, which is called Broken in the Best Possible Way. I only have this on audio, so I'll put a picture up of the cover for this one. Jenny Lawson is a blogger who has written about kind of her struggles with like mental and physical health and kind of day-to-day life. She is hilarious. As someone who's kind of awkward and socially anxious, I identify so much with her. And Broken just is a roller coaster. It had me laughing out loud, and she reads it, so I was laughing out loud in parts, and I was really sad in parts. It's so wonderfully done, and she is so much fun. I just appreciate her perspective, and she almost feels like a friend telling you about like their day-to-day life and making you giggle about it. So she's amazing. If you have any issues with anxiety or you just enjoy people being awkward, she's super fun. So I highly recommend that one. And then the next prompt is most beautiful book you've bought this year or received. And that is not in question. That is my illustrated copy of Guards. And I'll pull this out. Guards is the book that introduced me to Discworld, so I was inclined to pick it regardless, and I did end up rereading this this year, but I love this. I love the purple sprayed edges. I love the dragon on the front, and the best part is that it has illustrations throughout by Paul Kidby and is in fact signed by him. And some of them are just these plates like this with little quotes on them, and then some of them are kind of smaller illustrations that are in here, and then there's even one of the characters writes home a fair amount. Of course, I'm not going to be able to find that page. And they kind of, there it is. You actually get like letters that actually look like Carrot writing home. It's precious, and it's always going to be one of my favorites. It's probably the book that I treasure, not probably, it's definitely the book I treasure the most out of literally anything else I own, and probably always will be. So this is definitely my pick for that category. And then finally, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? And I actually have 3 different series that I need to read. So one of the ones is the Faithful and the Fallen series by John Gwynne. And I have heard a lot of amazing things about this. I also have somewhat of a side tangent in that I'm in a group that does Scottish historical reenactment. And we deal a lot with kind of figuring out some of the fighting for that, and I found out that John Gwynne does Viking historical reenactment, and that had me completely intrigued to see how he handles both the societal elements of it and then the battle scenes. I'm really hoping I enjoy it. I have heard most people seem to really enjoy it, but I have also heard some people who haven't. So I'm hoping I will fall in the enjoyment camp. But I'd like to at least start on this series, if not get through it by the end of the year. Then the next one that I'm actually starting next month is the Books of Babel series by Josiah Bancroft. There's a buddy read starting with Senlin Ascends next month that I'm trying to think. I think it's either Shelf Space or Library of Alexandria. I don't remember which one. I'll try and correct that when I edit this. But this has been raved about by many of the people in both of those Discords, so I'm really hoping I enjoy this one. And then the last one is also raved about in both of those Discords all the time. That's Long Price Quartet by Daniel Abraham. I normally am not a huge fan of political intrigue and kind of slower paced books, but I've heard amazing things about this one. I had started the first book in this series for the Shelf Space Olympics readathon, but wasn't able to make it very far, so I'm just going to restart this, hopefully in the next month or two, because I'd really like to get through this series, because it seems like everybody's loving it. So definitely looking forward to that. So that is the end of this tag video. I hope that anybody who has not done this yet will do it, because it's been really fun for me to see what everybody's answers are and kind of get a snapshot of their reading for the first half of this year. And I will see you in the next one. Bye!